Alright. Let's get this shit over with, man. So I did a video on RockyMarciano 6 months ago. And for some reason, people upset about what I said. This is the only thing I said. I ain't trying to rain on my guy Parade, but they said he didn't really box no great boxers. Do y'all think Ali would have lost to RockyMarciano? Do y'all think Mike Tyson would have lost? I ain't saying he wasn't all that, but I'm saying he had 6 title fights. But now my comments is crazy. Oh, you don't understand, but I'm gonna get more informed then, because that's what y'all want. So I got another RockyMarciano reaction. Let's find out if he was really as nice as y'all say he was.
Once showed my friend a highlight reel of RockyMarciano, to which he replied, "But that's not real, right?" That was from an old movie. And looking at the footage, it's easy to understand his reaction. RockyMarciano almost routinely knocked people out of the ring. Known as the Brockton Bomber.
Hey, I don't believe it either. He wasn't like that. Y'all gonna keep saying he was. Y'all gonna have to show me. This better show me something.
Marciano fought some of the greatest heavyweights of all time and stands as the only heavyweight champion without a single loss on his record. Allegedly, he had to have a custom 300-pound heavy bag made for his training, which would help explain why 43 of his 49 fights were won by devastating knockout. His achievements are all the more impressive when you consider that Rocky is a pretty unusual heavyweight, even for back then. At 5'10", with arms slightly shorter than Manny Pacquiao's, Rocky was one of the smallest heavyweight champions ever. Despite his size, he was also one of the heaviest hitters the division has ever seen. Put simply, Rocky's punches...
Hey, that was a good shot. I'm not gonna gas it. That was a good shot. I'll give him that. That was a good shot.
Sometimes look like something straight out of a comic book. Marciano also had the insane cardio necessary to maintain this intensity all the way until the 15th round, if opponents could last that long. Rocky threw so many punches so consistently that it didn't really matter if every single one hit. Even if his opponent had an iron guard, he would simply batter and bruise their arms until they lost all feeling and became rendered useless. Recently, Canelo Alvarez has used this same strategy to great effect. While his limitless stamina and bulldozer-like punches made Rocky the quintessential relentless fighter.
Like, you gonna have to get into it, bro. He's saying the same stuff the last video said. He gonna have to show me something new, man. Because I don't know.
He was far from being a mindless slugger who just overwhelmed his opponents with ferocity and brute force. Marciano's style was unorthodox, yet highly intelligent and very methodical. A lot of people ask how Rocky was so successful taking so much damage. A much better question to ask would be how someone so recklessly aggressive could take so little damage. A few videos ago, we examined how Thomas the Hitman Hearns was the perfect template for taller, lengthier fighters. Likewise, RockyMarciano is the perfect template for a shorter and stockier fighter. So today, we'll explore the ways that Rocky closed the distance, landed his incredible knockouts, and bullied his often larger competitors without getting bullied himself. From the moment the fight started, Rocky balanced aggression with nuanced defense. Almost every punch he threw had knockout potential. But almost every punch he threw was brilliantly set up in order to remain as safe as possible.
If somebody did this same video about Deontay Wilder and they showed that last punch that hit dude in the back of the head that Rocky threw, and he said that was thrown with precision, nobody would say that about dude. They'd be like, he just a slugger. He just swing for the fences. There is no technique. That's exactly what they would say, but now it's technique now. It's technique, bro.
This is especially impressive because Rocky was the embodiment of throwing your entire body weight into every punch. He would use exaggerated head movement to create extra distance, loading up his shots and putting a lot more momentum into his punches. While most fighters prefer to advance with their front foot first, Rocky preferred to do the opposite, moving his back foot to his front foot. This is very similar to the footwork used by Smokin' Joe Frazier. Like Frazier, it was not a very subtle or nuanced step, but it did allow Rocky to cover a lot of distance and put a lot more power behind his punches. Taken together, Rocky's exaggerated head movement and unusual shuffle step set up the ideal mechanics to unleash the two most powerful punches in boxing in the most powerful way possible. These punches were the right overhand and lead hook. To set up his—
Look, man, I understand that people who watching this, y'all like Rocky Marciano. That's the only reason why y'all watching it. And the last video, y'all didn't enjoy that either. I'ma say this, man. Y'all trying to make this nigga Larry Bird, bro. It's the same thing to me, man. I'm watching him, bro, and I'm like, Muhammad Ali looked a lot better boxing.
His overhand, Rocky would lean back while shuffling into an exchange. Another oddity, this movement pattern allowed him to advance while remaining defensively responsible. If his opponent tried to catch him with a jab or cross, Rocky didn't need to change his position drastically to respond. He could simply ride the punch back to reduce the impact, or shuffle away to a safe position from his crouch, as Mayweather likes to do. As well as keeping him safe, this backwards leaning advance loaded up an unbelievable amount of power in Rocky's punches. Particularly his signature Suzy Q cross and his decimating overhand. Since most of his weight over his rear foot, Rocky just needed to shift his weight forward to practically pitch his punch into his opponents. And this led to some of the most beautiful pole counters ever seen in the heavyweight division.
That was nice.
Taking it one step further, Rocky did not follow the conventional wisdom of twisting his back foot to put his hip behind his cross. Rocky would instead step into his cross, unpinning his back foot to allow more follow-through. Of course, a boxer lifting their back foot can cause them to lose balance, and many fighters would try to capitalize on that open window of vulnerability. But Rocky had a unique way of turning this seeming disadvantage into a safe exit. After setting up his cross, Rocky would often evade by lateral shuffling out to a southpaw stance, before pivoting back to an orthodox stance. Great boxing stylists like Roy Jones Jr. would go on to have great success with sequences exactly like this many years.
See, that's my problem, that right there, because you are forgetting Roy Jones Jr. was extremely fast, my nigga. Like, it wasn't just like Roy Jones did it like he did like a brute and then just stumbled over to the next foot. Like, no, nigga, Roy Jones was one of the fastest boxers in his class ever, with power on top of it. But see, I'm sorry, fam. I'm not saying that he's bad. He's obviously a great fighter. I'm just saying, you gotta stop it at some point, man. He wasn't that.
Later, if the opponent retreated, Rocky could turn his step into a full-on shift, moving forward into southpaw to chase down his opponents. This would turn his already powerful left hook into a shifting rear hook. Speaking of, Rocky's hook was just as devastating as his rear hand. Rocky would usually begin to set this up in the same way as his overhand, with deep, exaggerated head movement to build distance and momentum. Instead of leaning back into an overhand, he would weave to the inside, masking the beginning of his hook and building up momentum. Besides setting it up with an extremely deep inside crouch, the thing that made Marciano's hook unusual was that he often threw it as a gazelle punch. Like Frazier, Rocky would spring up out of his crouch to shuffle forward as he straightened up and threw. This not only covered more distance, but it also added a lot of weight to an already powerful hook. Floyd Patterson would
that nigga can't
popularize
fight. I ain't gonna sit here and say Rocky can't fight. He was doing
check
his
out my
thing.
video on him.
Not even gonna hate.
Since both his fight-ending hook and overhand came off of exaggerated head movement, Rocky's opponents would often be conditioned to see that movement alone as a warning, and he could use this to get them to back themselves into corners. Even the great Jersey Joe Walcott respected Rocky's power so much that he backed away from the mere sight of his swaying head movement, and this resulted in one of the most beautiful punches ever thrown. Rocky had one more line of defense to set up these dangerous attacks. These were the blocks that he used while crouching. And like everything else in his style, they were extremely unusual. Rocky would often alter his rear hand parry, letting it travel so far over his center line that it would turn into a rear cross block. Years later, Ken Norton would use a similar block to nullify Ali's jab, but usually from a more upright position. Another highly unusual but equally effective tactic was Rocky's lead inverse elbow block. While it's common to elevate the elbow during a shoulder roll to add more protection, Rocky took this one step further, offshooting the roll altogether. This block did a great job protecting the lead side of his head while he crouched. But if Rocky's long-range power shots didn't connect, that didn't mean opponents were out of the woods. Marciano's infighting was just as devastating as his long-range power blows. Rocky again used his shorter and stockier frame to its fullest advantage, getting in close and unleashing an endless barrage of shorter, tighter punches. So while a tall fighter like Hearns shines the best when they can keep their opponent at the end of their jab, Rocky knew that he needed to get past his opponent's jab. From there, his shorter arms could beat opponents to the punch and capitalize on angles that would tip the fight in his favor. Here too, Rocky seamlessly blended defense and offense. Because Rocky stepped or shuffled into his punches, he could put that momentum to good use by driving his head into his opponent's hip. This both kept him safe and unbalanced his competitors. Notice in this clip how Rocky uses the momentum from his stepping overhand to crash his head into Ezzard Charles' hip, smothering Charles and nullifying his counter before it can happen. Rocky could also use these head positions to manipulate his opponent's movement. Once his head was safely pinned on his opponent's shoulder or hip, Rocky would push forward to steer them off balance, or force them to back up. If opponents tried to counter wrestle, Rocky would rake his head up across their chest, pushing their chin up to leave them open for devastating headshots. Along with controlling their posture, Rocky would also manipulate their guard, and he would do this by directly prying it open. From his inside position, Rocky would insert his arms between his opponent's guard and crack it open, creating targets so that he could put his T-Rex arms to good use. But Rocky's main, go-to tactic on the inside was to suddenly disengage from his head slot on the opponent's shoulder in order to land a punch on the same side. Because his head effectively blocked his opponent's vision on that side, Rocky would use this to his advantage by suddenly unpinning his head and replacing it with his fist. But Rocky was at his very best when he combined his extreme head movement with his stellar wrestling. He would weave from one head position to another, unloading with the momentum of his head movement behind his punches, while pinning and smothering his opponent before they could counter. At times, Rocky would weave over or under his opponent's head, just like Roberto Duran would do years later. It should be noted that this technique requires a lot of skill and
man, dick suck, dude.
since it's easy to accidentally headbutt your opponent and get called for a foul, or get headbutted yourself and possibly cut. It should be clear by now that Rocky's style relied heavily on crossing the center line at both long range and close range. What Marciano really never gets enough credit for is how he could do the same thing with his footwork, and on a pretty intricate level. In fact, I would make the bold statement that Marciano had brilliant footwork that worked in tandem perfectly with his wild punches. Rather than simply barreling forward, Rocky turned the momentum from his shuffles into lateral movement. And these nuanced adjustments helped him to circumvent his opponent's guard, ensuring that each punch could come from a completely different angle, even while in the middle of throwing long combinations. A lot of Marciano's skill has been historically underappreciated. Mainly, I think, because his style was so unusual that it's not obvious right away what he was doing or why he was doing it. Even those that praise him tend to focus on his impressive knockout power and cardio, not looking far beyond that. But Rocky proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that his style had merit. He was a powerhouse, a stylist, an infighter, and a thinker. Marciano is well worth studying.
Alright, man, so that was Rocky Marciano, why he never lost a fight. Look, man, I enjoyed the video. Dude can box, man. I got my personal thoughts on who I think is better. Y'all don't think he's better. The Floyd Mayweather thing obviously was a joke, but y'all took that serious. Look, man, I gave y'all what y'all wanted. I did another video. I still think he mid. Ain't much I can do about that. It's just gonna be that way. But it's been Keith versus Star. Thank you for watching. If you made it all the way through, I appreciate you. Peace.